Marcus Kane stood in the docking bay of Crimson Nexus Station, checking his weapons for the third time that morning. The contract seemed simple enough: guard a vampire Empress during diplomatic talks, collect the payment, and disappear back into the outer colonies where humans carved out lives far from galactic politics. He had no interest in empires or their games, but the money was too good to refuse. Enough credits to finally retire, maybe. By that small farm on Terra Nova, he always dreamed. About the station hummed with activity around him. Vampires moved through the corridors. Like living shadows, their pale skin almost glowing under the red-tinted lights that protected their sensitive eyes from harsh spectrum exposure. Marcus had encountered bloodborne before on the frontier worlds, where they sometimes hunted in the dark spaces. Between settlements, but never this many, never an entire station full of apex predators, who viewed most species as either food or servants as contact appeared. A thin vampire dressed in formal robes who looked Marcus up and down with barely concealed disdain, another human. Mercenary playing soldier in a galaxy that belonged to older, stronger species, but the vampire said nothing, just gestured for Marcus to follow, leading him deeper into the station, toward the diplomatic chambers where the Empress waited. Passed through security checkpoints where vampire guards scanned Marcus with equipment that mapped every weapon, every piece of equipment, every potential threat he carried. The guards exchanged glances when they saw his arsenal: plasma pistols, kinetic rifles, flash charges, enough firepower to take down a small army. One guard laughed, a cold sound that made Marcus's skin crawl, thinking this human actually believed his toys would matter against true predators. The diplomatic chamber doors opened, and Marcus got his first look at Empress. Serafini, she sat on a raised platform, surrounded by her core division of deadly elegance in dark robes that seemed to absorb light itself. Her skin was pale as moon dust, her hair black as void space, and her eyes burned crimson like dying stars. She radiated power in a way that made every instinct in Marcus's body scream to run, to hide, to submit before this perfect predator. Noticed him, but Marcus didn't run. He never did. That was what made humans useful in a galaxy full of stronger species. They were too stubborn to know when they were outmatched. He walked forward, keeping his hand away from his weapons, showing respect without showing fear, until he stood before the platform, meeting those burning eyes with his own. Steady gaze. Seraphine tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that felt like being dissected. Her court whispered in their ancient tongue voices, too quick for Marcus to catch, but their tone carried surprised confusion, almost shock. The Empress held up one pale hand, and the whispers died instantly, leaving only silence heavy as gravity. She spoke, and her voice was like silk wrapped around steel blades, smooth and beautiful and absolutely lethal. You are the human mercenary Marcus Kane, the one who survived the Keldrith uprising, who held the pass at Broken Ridge for 3 days against impossible odds, who earned 17 commendations for valor from the Colonial Defense Force. Dotted once. Yes, Empress, that's me. He kept his voice neutral, professional. This was a job, nothing more, no matter how those crimson eyes seemed to see straight through his armor into the man beneath. Seraphin smiled, showing just a hint of fang. Interesting. Most humans tremble when they meet me. They cannot help it. Their bodies know what I am, what I can do to them. Yet you stand there calm, as if facing a vampire. Empress is just another day in your short human life. Fit is just another day, Marcus replied. I've faced worse things than vampires on the frontier worlds. At least you people follow laws, have civilization out there. It's just hunger and violence with no rules at all. The court gasped at his casual tone. Vampires did not take kindly to being compared unfavorably to frontier beasts. But Seraphin laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise even her own attendants. She waved her hand, dismissing the court's outrage. Very well, Marcus Kane. You will serve as my personal guard during these negotiations. The Krithri Federation wants to discuss border territories, and I expect they will try to intimidate me with shows of force. Having a human who doesn't scare easily might prove useful. Negotiations began in a massive chamber, where representatives from a dozen species gathered. The Krithri delegation arrived in full military dress, their insectoid bodies covered in ceremonial armor that clinked with every movement. Their lead negotiator, Hive Commander Zreth, clicked his mandibles in what passed for a smile among his kind, demanding the sanguine dominion. Withdraw from contested space immediately. Marcus positioned himself near the exits, scanning faces, watching hands, looking for the signs that always preceded violence he had learned long ago. That diplomacy was just warfare with prettier words, and someone always preferred the direct approach. Serafine responded to Zareth's demands with cool logic, pointing out that the contested territories were claimed by neither side, that her people had as much right to settle there as anyone else, that perhaps cooperation would serve everyone better than conflict. Her words were reasonable, but Marcus saw the rage building in Zareth's compound eyes, saw the way the Cry-3 guards shifted their weight, preparing for action. It happened fast, the way violence always does. 3 Cry-3 agents threw off their diplomatic robes, revealing UV emitters strapped to their thoraxes. Bright burning light flooded the chamber, and every vampire in the room recoiled, screaming, as their sensitive skin began to smoke. The agents pulled plasma charges from hidden compartments, arming them with practiced efficiency, clearly intending to eliminate the Empress. While her guards were blind and helpless, Marcus moved his body, reacting before his mind finished processing the threat. He threw himself across the platform, slamming into Serafine and driving her to the floor behind her throne. A photon grenade detonated where she had been sitting, powerful enough to incinerate a vampire in seconds. His armor absorbed most of the blast, but he felt the heat searing through anyway. Burning his back and shoulders, he rolled, coming up with both pistols drawn, and fired 3 quick shots, dropping the agents before they could release their plasma charges. The remaining Cry-3 guards rushed forward, and Marcus met them in close combat, using his momentum and lower center of gravity to compensate for their greater strength. He broke mandibles, shattered compound eyes, drove his elbow into soft thorax joints until the chamber floor was littered with twitching insectoid body station. Security finally arrived, flooding the chamber with armed troops, but the fight was already over. Marcus stood among the fallen assassins, breathing hard, feeling blood running down his back from burns that would need medical attention. He turned to check on Serafine and found her staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Empress rose to her feet, her court rushing to surround her, but she pushed them away, keeping her eyes locked on Marcus. "You protected me," she said, as if the concept was foreign to her understanding. "You threw yourself between me and death without hesitation." "It's my job," Marcus said simply. "Besides, that blast would have killed you, but I had armor. Figured I had better odds of surviving." Serafine stepped closer, until she stood just inches away, close enough that Marcus could feel the unnatural cold radiating from her body, close enough to see the network of veins beneath her pale skin. 300 years, she whispered. "I have ruled for 3 centuries, and no one has ever done what you just did." She reached out and touched his face, her fingers ice cold against his skin, her crimson eyes searching his for something Marcus wasn't sure he possessed. "Stay in my bed tonight." Her voice was barely audible, meant only for him, not a command, not a seduction, just a request, raw and vulnerable, in a way that seemed impossible for such a powerful predator. Marcus should have refused, should have maintained professional distance, should have recognized the danger in getting too close to an immortal Empress. But he saw something in those ancient eyes that he recognized, because he felt it himself: loneliness, the weight of always standing alone, always being the strongest, always being the one everyone else looked to for protection. He nodded once. "Yes, Empress, I'll stay." Part 2. The Predator's Confession. Marcus followed Serafine through the private corridors of her flagship, the Eternal Night, a massive vessel that served as both warship and mobile palace. The Empress walked ahead of him, her robes flowing like liquid shadow, while her guard detail maintained careful distance behind them. Vampires understood hierarchy, and right now their Empress had made clear she wanted privacy with the human mercenary. They reached her personal chambers, and Serafine dismissed everyone with a wave of her hand. Even her most trusted attendants retreated, leaving Marcus alone with the most powerful predator in known space. The doors sealed with a heavy sound that reminded Marcus of tomb doors closing in old horror vids from Earth. But Marcus didn't relax. He immediately began checking the room, moving through it with practiced efficiency, scanning for threats, checking sightlines, examining access points. Serafine watched him with amusement, playing at the corners of her mouth, as he set up detection grids near the windows and activated his personal scanner to sweep for listening devices. Or hidden weapons. You really are a soldier, she observed. Settling onto a large couch that probably costs more than Marcus would earn in a lifetime, even here alone. With me, you cannot stop protecting. Can't afford to, Marcus replied, finishing his security sweep and finally holstering his weapons. Someone just tried to kill you earlier, which means they'll try again. Competent assassins don't quit after one failure. They adapt and come back hard. Seraphine gestured to a chair across from her. Sit, Marcus Kane. Let us talk as people, not as Empress, and guard. The night cycle has begun, and for a few hours. I wish to forget the weight of my crown. Marcus sat, but kept himself alert, ready to move if needed. What do you want to talk about, Empress? Call me Seraphine, she said, when we are alone like this. I am just a person, a very old, very tired person, who rarely gets to speak honestly with anyone. All right, Seraphine. Marcus leaned back slightly. What's on your mind? She was quiet for a moment, staring at something only she could see. Do you know what immortality truly means, Marcus? Most species imagine it as a gift, endless. Time to learn, to experience, to build empires and dynasties, but they do not understand the weight of watching centuries pass. Marcus said nothing, just listened, recognizing that she needed to speak more than she needed responses. Everyone might care for withers and dies. Seraphine continued, her voice soft in the dim light of her chambers. I have watched civilizations rise and fall, seen species go extinct, witnessed stars burn out and die. I remember when humans first achieved faster than light travel, stumbling into a galaxy that did not want them there, crude and violent, and so beautifully stubborn. She turned those crimson eyes to him. Do you know how many friends I have had, Marcus? How many people I have trusted with my genuine self over 300 years? How many? Marcus asked. None, she said simply, until tonight. Weight of that confession settled between them like a physical thing. Marcus processed it, understanding suddenly why she had asked him to stay. It wasn't about desire or power games. It was about something much simpler and much more human than need. To not be alone. Why me? He asked. I'm just a mercenary, Empress. There must be thousands of people more worthy of your trust. So often leaned forward, her intense gaze pinning him in place. Because you saw me vulnerable, Marcus. You saw me need protection. And you did not hesitate, did not calculate politics or advantage. You just acted, throwing yourself between me and death, as if it was the most natural thing in the galaxy. She stood and moved to the large window that looked out into space, her reflection ghostly in the transparent steel. Because in 300 years no one has ever protected me. Everyone fears me, respects me, obeys me, but no one has ever treated me as someone worth dying for. I am always the predator, always the threat, always alone. At the top of the food chain, Marcus stood and walked to join her at the window, understanding more than she probably realized. I grew up on Haven's Edge, he said, a frontier colony where humans barely survived. Every day the raiders came, sometimes aliens, sometimes other humans, just taking what they wanted, killing whoever got in their way. Stared out at the stars, remembering things he usually kept buried. I watched my parents die trying to protect our settlement, watched my sister bleed out in my arms because we had no medical supplies, watched my home burn while I hid in the crawl spaces, too small and weak to help anyone. Seraphine turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. That's when I learned what humans are really good at. Marcus continued, we're not the strongest or the fastest, but the longest lived. We don't have natural weapons or armor or psychic powers, but we have one thing that matters more than all of that. What? Seraphine asked. When Marcus said simply, we get knocked down and we get back up. We face things that should kill us, and we find ways to survive. We protect the people who can't protect themselves, because that's what gives our short lives meaning. He met her eyes. We're not the galaxy's apex predators, Seraphine. We're the galaxy's survivors, and survivors know how to spot others who carry the same weight. You're immortal, powerful ruler of an empire, but you're also alone, carrying responsibility that no one else can share. I know what that feels like. Seraphine reached out slowly, telegraphing her movement, giving Marcus time to pull away if he wanted, but he didn't. She touched his face with fingers that could shred. Steel but moved gentle as silk. I have not felt safe in centuries. She whispered until tonight, when a human mercenary threw himself between me and death. Without thinking about it, Marcus didn't pull away, didn't treat her touch as threat or privilege. Just accepted it. You hired me to protect you, he said. That's what I'm going to do, not because of the contract anymore, but because you matter. What you're trying to build here matters, and you shouldn't have to do it. Alone, something shifted in Seraphine's expression, the careful mask of imperial control cracking. Just slightly stay with me tonight, she said. Not as my guard, but as someone who understands. Let us both pretend for a few hours that we are not alone in this vast, cold galaxy. Marcus nodded, and they sat together on the couch, talking as the ship sailed through the void. Seraphine told him about the early days of her reign. The wars she had fought, the enemies she had defeated, the loneliness that came with power that no one ever spoke about openly. She described watching the universe change around her, adapting to new technologies, new species, new ways of thinking, while always remaining fundamentally herself. Unchanging, immortal, isolated, Marcus shared his own stories, growing up rough on frontier worlds, fighting in colonial defense forces, learning that sometimes the only difference between heroes and corpses was luck and stubbornness, becoming a mercenary not for glory or wealth, but because he was good at protecting people, and someone needed to do it. They talked about philosophy, about war, about the nature of leadership and loneliness. Seraphina asked why humans threw themselves into danger for others, why they built communities and civilizations when they knew they would only live long enough to see a fraction of what they built. Marcus explained it was because humans understood that life's meaning came from what you left behind, not what you accumulated. The night cycle wore on. Seraphine moved closer until she was resting against Marcus, her head on his shoulder. Something no vampire empress should ever do with anyone. Marcus held her, gently, aware of how surreal this moment was, how impossible, how deeply human. Despite everything, you are remarkable, she whispered. Your entire species is remarkable. You live such brief lives, but you burn so bright, fighting and building and loving with intensity that immortals cannot match, because you know your time is limited. Marcus smiled. We have to make every moment count, he said. Can't afford to waste time on fear or hesitation. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just existing together without masks or roles, just to people who understood what it meant to carry weight alone. Seraphine eventually fell into the meditative state that vampires used instead of sleep, her body cool and still against him. Marcus stayed awake, keeping watch as he always did, protecting this ancient predator who had finally found someone she could trust. When morning cycle approached, Seraphine stirred, opening those crimson eyes to find Marcus still there, still watching over her. She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face from imperial mask to something warmer. Thank you, she said, for staying, for listening, for not running away. Marcus squeezed her shoulder gently. Nowhere else I'd rather be, Empress. Call me Seraphine, she reminded him. When we are alone, I am just Seraphine, all right. Seraphine, Marcus said, and meant it. This was the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet, but both recognized as important. Outside, the viewport stars streamed past, and somewhere in the dark, a galaxy was changing because a human mercenary had refused to see a monster, and a vampire empress had learned to trust. Again, Part 3, Empire of Shadows, Morning Cycle, brought more than just the artificial dawn that illuminated the eternal night's corridors. It brought crisis in the form of cryptid intelligence reports that landed on Seraphine's desk while she and Marcus shared a quiet breakfast. The investigation into the assassination attempt had concluded, and the results were worse than anyone expected. The attack was orchestrated by members of the Bloodborne Council itself. Seraphine read from the report, her voice carefully controlled, but Marcus could hear the tension beneath. Specifically, a faction led by Elder Lord Valkyrath, they believe. I've grown too weak to willing to negotiate with lesser species when I should be expanding the Dominion through conquest. Marcus set down his cup, studying her face. How bad is it? Bad enough that I must return to Noctis Prime immediately to face formal challenge at the Grand Conclave. Seraphine met his eyes. If I do not appear, it will be seen as admission of weakness, and the Council will vote to remove Me from power? Then we go to Noctis Prime, Marcus said. Simply Seraphin shook her head. You do not understand what you are offering. Marcus, the Grand Conclave, is vampire political theater. At its most deadly, humans rarely survive, even as observers. The atmosphere itself is designed to trigger primal fear in other species, and if it comes to trial by combatium, Marcus interrupted his tone, leaving no room for argument. You hired me to protect you. That doesn't stop just because the threat comes from your own people. Besides, he allowed himself a small smile. Someone needs to make sure you don't face this alone. Something warm flickered in Seraphine's crimson eyes, an emotion Marcus was learning to recognize as affection mixed with exasperation. You are impossibly stubborn. It's a human trait, Marcus replied. We specialize in not knowing when we're beaten. They departed for Noctis Prime within the hour. The flagship, jumping through hyperspace lanes that led deep into Sanguine Dominion territory. Marcus spent the journey studying everything he could about vampire culture, politics, and combat capabilities. If this turned into a fight, he wanted every advantage he could manufacture through preparation and planning. Noctis Prime appeared in the viewport like a dark jewel. Against the void, the entire planet was engineered for vampire comfort, its sun filtered through orbital mirrors that removed the harsh wavelengths that burned bloodborne skin. The cities below glowed with red and amber, lights visible even from orbit. Massive Gothic structures that had stood for thousands of years. The eternal night descended toward the capital, landing at the obsidian palace that served as the heart of vampire government. Marcus followed Seraphine down the boarding ramp and immediately felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him. The very air seemed thick with age and power. The stones beneath his feet had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. Vampire aristocracy filled the palace corridors. Ancient bloodlines that predated human spaceflight by millennia. They turned to watch as Seraphine passed, their expressions ranging from reverence to calculation to barely concealed contempt. And when their eyes landed on Marcus walking beside their Empress, the whispers began immediate and cutting. A human pet, one vampire noble said, just loud enough to be heard. How the mighty have fallen. Marcus ignored them. He had dealt with bullies his entire life, and vampires were just bullies with fangs and better tailors. He kept his hand away from his weapons, maintaining professional bearing while cataloging every face, every potential threat, every escape route, his mind already building tactical maps of the palace layout. They reached the Grand Conclave Chamber, a massive hall that could hold thousands of vampires. The walls were carved with scenes of bloodborne history, conquests, and triumphs that stretched back before humans had even discovered fire. The ceiling soared, possibly high, disappearing into shadows that seemed to move with their own life. The bloodborne council sat in a semicircle of ornate thrones, each elder vampire representing centuries of accumulated power and influence. Lord Valkareth occupied the central throne, a creature so ancient that his skin had taken on an almost translucent quality, like old parchment stretched over sharp bones. His eyes burned with cold intelligence as he watched Seraphine enter. Empress Seraphine. His voice echoed through the chamber, formal and empty of warmth. You honor us with your presence. We have grave matters to discuss regarding the future of our dominion. Seraphine ascended to her own throne, positioned above the council, a symbolic reminder of her authority. I am aware of your concerns, Lord Valkareth. Perhaps you would care to voice them openly, rather than hiding behind assassins. The chamber went silent, every vampire present recognizing the direct challenge. Valkareth's expression didn't change, but Marcus saw the slight tightening around his eyes, the only sign that the accusation had struck home. Your policies in danger us all, Valkareth said after a long pause. You negotiate with lesser species as if they were our equals. You establish treaties that limit our expansion. You allow humans and others to move freely through our territories, as if the Sanguine Dominion was some kind of democratic federation. We are vampires, Seraphine. We are the apex predators of this galaxy. We should be expanding our empire, subjugating those too weak to resist, not wasting time on diplomatic niceties with creatures who live and die in the span of an eye. Blink. Seraphine leaned forward, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. And what would you have me do? Lord Valkareth, conquer every species we encounter, drain them dry, and rule over an empire of corpses and resentment. How long do you think such a regime would last before the entire galaxy united against us? We would crush them. Valkareth replied, his confidence absolute, as we have crushed every threat before Marcus. Heard enough, he stepped forward, drawing every vampire eye in the chamber to him, the human mercenary who dared walk among bloodborne elders with your permission, Empress. I have something to say, Seraph. I stared for him to continue, her expression unreadable. Marcus looked directly at Valkareth. I've fought in a lot of wars, he said, both as a soldier and a mercenary, and I've learned something important. The strongest side doesn't always win, the side that can adapt, that can find allies, that can build something worth protecting. Those are the ones that survive. Vekar's lips curled in a sneer, showing fangs. You presume to lecture me, human. I have forgotten more about warfare than your entire species has learned, maybe, Marcus replied. But my species is still here, still growing, still adapting. How many species has your dominion wiped out over the centuries, Lord Valkareth, and how many came back to challenge you again? The dead don't fight back, but they also don't contribute anything either, except reasons for others to fear and hate. Youth elder vampire stood, rage radiating from him like heat. You dare speak to me this way in my own hall? Marcus held his ground. I dare because someone needs to tell you that strength without wisdom is just violence, and violence without purpose is just destruction. The Empress understands this. She's trying to build something that will last not just for centuries, but for millennia. An empire based on cooperation rather than conquest. Valkareth descended from his throne, moving with predatory grace that sent chills down Marcus's spine. I challenge the Empress's fitness to rule. Declared loudly enough for every vampire present to hear, I invoke the ancient right of trial by combat. Let her prove her strength or abdicate the throne. Chamber erupted in whispers as vampires discussed this development. Trial by combat was ancient law rarely invoked, but absolute in its authority. The challenged ruler could either fight personally or name a champion to represent them. It was supposed to be a way to ensure only the strong lead the dominion. Seraphini rose from her throne, her expression calm. I accept your challenge. Lord Valkareth and I name my champion. She pointed directly at Marcus Kane, this human who has already proven his courage. And loyalty will fight in my place. The chamber exploded in laughter, vampires genuinely amused by the audacity of this declaration. A human challenging an elder vampire? It was absurd, suicidal entertainment that would at least break the monotony of political manivile. Phil Karth smiled cold and cruel. I accept this farce, he said. I will enjoy tearing your pet apart slowly. Seraphini, perhaps it will teach you the foolishness of trusting lesser species. Marcus met the ancient vampire's eyes. Without flinching, when and where? Tomorrow night in the old arena, Valkareth replied. We shall see if human courage means anything against bloodborne fury. The conclave adjourned, and Seraphine led Marcus back to her private quarters once the doors sealed. She grabbed his shoulders, her grip tight enough to hurt Marcus. What have you done that is an elder vampire with 3,000 years of combat experience? Will kill you. Marcus covered her hands with his own. Probably, he admitted, but maybe not. I've survived worse odds before, and someone needs to show these ancient predators that humans don't back down from bullies regardless of how many fangs they have. You do not have to do this, Seraphine said, her voice breaking slightly. This is not your fight. Marcus pulled her close until their foreheads touched. Yes, it is, he said, because you matter to me. Seraphine, not as an empress or a contract, but as someone. I care about someone worth fighting for, and if I have to go through an ancient vampire to prove it, then that's what I'll do. Seraphine closed her eyes, and for a moment she looked almost fragile despite all her power. You impossible, stubborn, beautiful human, she whispered. Marcus smiled. Comes with the species, he said. Now let's figure out how to keep me alive long enough to show Valkareth why humans are worth respecting. Part 4. Trial of Fangs. The old arena had stood on Noctis's prime since before humans discovered fire, a massive, circular structure carved from black stone that had witnessed countless trials by combat over millennia. Bloodborne aristocracy filled the viewing platforms. Thousands of vampires gathered to watch the spectacle of a human challenging an elder. The air hummed with their anticipation, and barely suppressed bloodless Marcus stood in the preparation chamber, checking his equipment one final time. He wore light combat armor, designed for mobility rather than protection. Plasma blades hung at his sides, weapons that could at least hurt a vampire. If he got close enough, the burns from the assassination attempt still ached across his back, but he had fought through worse pain before Seraphine entered the chamber carrying something wrapped in dark cloth. She looked like she hadn't slept, though. Vampires didn't truly need rest the way humans did. Worry etched lines around her eyes that made her look almost mortal. "I brought you something," she said, unwrapping the cloth to reveal ancient weapons. Marcus recognized them immediately. Human weapons. Plasma pistols and kinetic blades recovered from long-dead colonies, weapons that had belonged to his ancestors, who carved out lives on hostile worlds. "Where did you get these?" "I have collected human artifacts for centuries," Seraphine admitted, "a hobby that others found strange, but I always admired your species' determination. These belong to the defenders of Outpost 7, who held against impossible odds for 3 weeks, buying time for others to escape." She pressed the weapons into his hands. "They are yours by right, Marcus, weapons carried by humans who refused to surrender, who fought until the very end, just like you will fight today." Marcus holstered the weapons, feeling their weight, the history they carried. "Thank you, Seraphine, not just for these, but for trusting." Mesh cupped his face with both hands, her touch ice, cold but gentle. "You have given me something I thought I would never have again. Hope that things can change, that I do not have to rule alone, that someone will stand beside me, not out of fear or obligation, but because they choose to." Marcus leaned into her touch. "Win or lose tonight, you won't be alone anymore. I promise you that." The arena doors opened and Marcus walked out into the massive space. The crowd's noise hit him like a physical force. Thousands of vampires cheering and jeering, calling out bets on how long the human would survive. Already stood at the arena's center, a nightmare made flesh, wearing ceremonial armor that looked like it was forged from darkness itself. Elder Vampire had transformed into his war form, something Marcus had only seen in military briefings. Valkyrith's fingers had extended into razor claws. His fangs protruded like daggers. His eyes burned with predatory hunger that had ended countless lives over 3 millennia. He radiated power and confidence and absolute certainty of victory. An arbiter vampire stepped forward to announce the terms: trial by combat to determine fitness of rule, the Empress's champion. Marcus Kane versus Lord Valkyroth. Combat continues until one combatant yields or dies. The crowd roared approval at the mention of death, clearly expecting human blood to stain the arena. Florida and Marcus drew his plasma blades, weapons humming to life with blue-white energy. He fell into a combat stance. Weight balanced, ready to move. Valkyrith laughed, a sound like breaking bones echoing through the arena. "Tell me, human," the elder vampire said, "do you have any last words before I tear you apart?" Marcus met those ancient eyes steadily. "Just one," he replied. "Humans don't quit." The arbiter signaled the start of combat, and Valkyrith moved. He crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat impossibly fast, even for a vampire, his claws slashing toward Marcus's throat with enough force to decapitate a lesser creature. Marcus barely dodged, feeling the wind of the strike pass. Inches from his face, he tried to counter, but Valkyrath was already gone, circling around him with speed that made him almost invisible. The elder vampire struck again and again, each blow coming from a different angle, each one aimed at vital points. Marcus's armor shredded under the assault, blood spraying his claws. Found flesh beneath, Marcus went down hard, hitting the stone floor and rolling away on pure instinct. Another strike carved a trench where he had been lying. He came up bleeding from a dozen cuts, his armor hanging in tatters. The crowd laughed, delighted by the entertainment watching this human try to fight against overwhelming power. Valkyrith paused, savoring the moment. This is what happens when lesser species challenge their betters, he announced to the crowd. Death swift and brutal. Let this be a lesson to all who would question vampire supremacy. But Marcus pushed himself to his feet, legs shaking, blood running down his arms, his chest, his face. Everything hurt, and his body screamed for him to stay down, to surrender, to give up fighting against impossible odds. That's what humans do, though. They get back up. They keep fighting. They find a way. He remembered what Seraphine taught him about vampire psychology. They expected fear, expected submission, expected prey behavior to kick in when their opponent realized they were outmatched, that arrogance was their weakness. The belief that being apex predators made them invincible, Marcus charged forward, not away catching Valkyreth off guard for just a moment. That moment was enough. Marcus drove both plasma blades toward the vampire's center mass, forcing Valkyreth to dodge instead of attack for the first time, making the ancient predator react to human aggression. Instead of the other way around, they fought, and Marcus began to see the patterns in Valkyreth's attacks. The elder vampire relied on speed and strength, but he fought with arrogant confidence, expecting his opponent to break, expecting fear to do half the work for him. He didn't adapt because he had never needed to. Nothing had ever stood against him long enough to require adaptation. Marcus started trading wounds for position, giving ground to create opportunities. He took a slash across his ribs to land a plasma blade strike on Valkyreth's shoulder, actually drawing blood. The crowd went silent, shocked that the human had hurt an elder vampire, had made ancient flesh bleed. Valkyreth snarled genuine rage, replacing his amused contempt. Now the vampire came at Marcus with full fury. No more playing, no more savoring the kill. Just pure predatory violence meant to end this fight immediately. His claws tore through Marcus's already damaged armor, scored deep wounds across his back and chest. Marcus absorbed the punishment, staying on his feet through pure stubbornness. His vision started to blur from blood loss, but he kept moving, kept watching, kept learning Valkyreth's patterns. The vampire always struck high, assuming his opponents would protect their heads and throats, always. Followed claw strikes with attempted bites, always moved to his right after a combination. Next time Valkyreth attacked, Marcus was ready. He feinted left, then dodged right into the space where the vampire expected to be instead of where Valkyreth actually was for one heartbeat. Marcus was inside the elder vampire's guard, both plasma blades positioned perfectly. Struck, driving both weapons through Valkyreth's chest, punching through ancient armor and older flesh, pinning the vampire against the arena floor. Marcus held him there, using his weight and leverage as Valkyreth thrashed, disbelieving that this was happening, that a human had actually beaten him. "You were right about one thing," Marcus said through gritted teeth, his voice barely audible over Valkyreth's struggles. "Vampires are apex predators, stronger and faster and more dangerous than humans will ever be." He pushed the blades deeper, feeling them burned through undead flesh. "But you forgot something important. Being the apex predator makes you arrogant, makes you forget what it means to fight for your life. Humans, we remember that every day. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy, but we are the survivors, and survivors always find a way." Valkyreth's struggles weakened his ancient body. Finally accepting what his pride could not, he dissolved into ash the way defeated vampires did according to their ancient customs, leaving Marcus kneeling on the arena floor, covered in blood, barely conscious, but alive and victorious. Crowd remained silent for a long moment, unable to process what they had witnessed. Then slowly one vampire began to clap, then another, then more, until the entire arena erupted. Not in mockery, but in genuine respect. They had watched a human prove that determination could overcome supernatural power, that courage meant more than fangs, and Seraphine appeared at Marcus's side, helping him to his feet, her eyes shining with emotions she probably didn't have names for. "You magnificent, impossible, stubborn human," she whispered. "You actually did it." Marcus managed a weak smile. "Told you," he said before his legs gave out and darkness claimed him. He woke in Seraphine's private chambers, his wounds bandaged, his body aching but alive. The Empress sat beside him, holding his hand, her touch gentle as she watched over him the way he had watched over her that first night. "Have changed everything," she said softly when he opened his eyes. "The council cannot deny what everyone witnessed, a human defeating an elder vampire in single combat, proving that strength. It's not just about physical power." Marcus squeezed her hand weakly, had to show them. He said that you were right, that humans are worth respecting, worth including in your empire. Seraphine leaned down and kissed his forehead, a gesture of affection that no vampire empress should show anyone. "You showed them more than that, Marcus. You showed them that I am not alone. Any more, that I have someone who will fight beside me, who will stand with me against any challenge." She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, that steady rhythm of human life. "Yeah, my heart," Marcus Kane, such as it is, and I will spend eternity trying to deserve the gift you have given my Marcus. Closed his eyes, feeling exhaustion pulling him toward sleep. Then we will face that eternity together, he murmured. He said, because that is what humans do best, making impossible. Things work. Part 5. Dawn of Two Worlds. Marcus spent 3 days recovering from his wounds in Seraphine's chambers. While vampire doctors worked to repair the damage Valkrith had inflicted, the physical injuries healed quickly thanks to advanced medical technology, but the arena fight had done something more important than just prove Marcus's combat abilities. It had fundamentally changed how the Sanguine Dominion viewed humanity. News of the trial spread across the galaxy like wildfire. A human mercenary had defeated a 3,000-year-old vampire elder in single combat, proving that determination and tactical thinking could overcome raw supernatural power. Diplomatic requests flooded into Noctis's Prime from species that had previously refused contact with the Dominion. Everyone wanted to meet the Empress, who valued humans as equals, who had chosen a mortal champion over her own immortal kin. The Bloodborne Council met in emergency session, but this time there was no talk of removing Seraphine from power. The remaining elders had witnessed what happened to Valkrith, had seen their arrogant assumptions about lesser species shattered on the arena floor. They accepted Seraphine's reign with newfound respect, acknowledging that perhaps change was not weakness, but evolution. Seraphine stood before the council with Marcus at her side, his wounds still visible but his bearing strong. The Empress announced her intention to establish the first mixed species embassy on Noctis Prime, a place where humans and vampires could work together, sharing knowledge and building the foundation for lasting cooperation. Elder Lady Cassandra, one of the more progressive council members, spoke first. This is unprecedented, Empress. Our people have always kept other species at distance, maintaining the separation between predator and prey perhaps. That is why we have stagnated. Seraphine replied, her voice carrying absolute authority. We have been apex predators for so long that we forgot how to grow, how to adapt. The humans have something to teach us about survival, about building communities that transcend individual power. She gestured to Marcus. This human threw himself between me and death without hesitation, not because I commanded it, but because he chose to protect me. He faced Valkrith, knowing he would probably die, but refusing to back down. That is not weakness, Council. That is strength of a kind we vampires have forgotten. The Council voted, and the measure passed, not unanimously, but by enough margin to matter. Construction began immediately on the embassy complex, a structure that blended vampire Gothic architecture with human practical design, symbolizing the merger of two very different cultures working toward common goals. But not everyone celebrated the changes. Extremist factions from multiple species viewed this cooperation as a dangerous threat to their isolationist ideologies. Vampire purists, who believed in bloodborne supremacy, allied with human separatist groups who feared vampire influence, creating an unlikely coalition united only by their hatred of Seraphine's vision. The attack came during a state dinner celebrating the embassy's completion. Marcus and Seraphine hosted representatives from a dozen species, including human Colonial Federation officials. The mood was optimistic as people who had once viewed each other as enemies or food shared conversation and found common ground. Marcus noticed them first, 3 servers moving with coordinated precision that marked military training. His hand moved toward his weapon even before his conscious mind finished processing the threat. He shouted a warning and threw himself towards Seraphine. As the servers revealed hidden weapons, plasma charges, and viral toxins designed to kill both vampires and humans, Seraphine moved with predatory grace, her vampire speed allowing her to cross the distance to the nearest attacker. In a heartbeat, she caught the assassin's wrist and twisted, breaking bones with casual strength before throwing the attacker across the room with enough force to shatter a support. Marcus engaged the second attacker in close combat using techniques he had learned from studying vampire movement patterns during his recovery. He was faster now, more confident, having faced down an elder vampire and survived. A human assassin was almost disappointing by comparison. He disarmed the attacker and put them down with ruthless efficiency. The third assassin managed to trigger one of the plasma charges, but Seraphine was already there, catching the explosive device and hurling it through a reinforced window where it detonated harmlessly. The sky above the palace security forces flooded the dining hall, but the fight was already over. Marcus and Seraphine stood back to back, surrounded by shocked diplomats. Both of them breathing hard but uninjured, they turned to face each other, and something passed between them, a recognition that they had become something more than just Empress and guard. They were partners, equals, despite all their differences. Surviving assassin was interrogated, revealing the conspiracy, a loose network of extremists from multiple species who feared that cooperation between humans and vampires would spread, making it harder to maintain. The old hatreds and divisions, they had hoped that killing Seraphine and Marcus during the embassy celebration would shatter the fragile alliances. It had the opposite effect. The attack proved that cooperation was necessary, that isolationism only bred more violence. The Human Colonial Federation formally recognized the Sanguine Dominion as an ally, and Seraphine reciprocated, creating the first official treaty between their peoples. Trade agreements followed, then cultural exchanges, then joint military operations against pirate groups that threatened both their territories. Marcus found himself in an unusual position, no longer just a bodyguard but an advisor, helping Seraphine navigate the complexities of human culture while learning about vampire society himself. He discovered that vampires valued loyalty and strength above all else, and humans had both in abundance. Their short lives made them treasure relationships more intensely, and their adaptability allowed them to find solutions that immortal species overlooked. 6 months after the trial by combat, Marcus and Seraphine stood together on the observation deck of the Eternal Night, watching construction crews assembling a new space station in orbit above Noctis Prime, the joint headquarters for human-vampire cooperation, a symbol visible from the planet's surface. That things had changed forever. "You have transformed my empire," Seraphina said softly, leaning against Marcus in a way that still surprised the vampire guards, who watched from respectful distance. "In 6 months you have accomplished what I could not achieve in 300 years. Sai just showed your people what humans can do," Marcus replied, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "The rest was all you having the courage to trust me, to stand against your own counsel, to imagine something better than endless conquest." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Seraphine spoke again, her voice hesitant in a way that Marcus had learned meant she was about to say something important. "I love you, Marcus Kane. I know it is complicated. Know that our lifespans do not match. Know that vampire and human coupling is unprecedented. But I cannot deny what I feel anymore." Marcus turned to face her fully, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I love you too, Seraphine," he said simply. "I know all the same problems, know that we will face opposition from people who think this is unnatural or wrong, but I'm human, and humans specialize in making impossible things work." She smiled, showing just a hint of fang. The gesture that Marcus had learned meant genuine happiness rather than threat. "We will face criticism," she warned. "Both our peoples have those who believe we are betraying our respective kinds. Let them criticize," Marcus said. "They will anyway. Might as well give them something real to complain about." "Besides," he grinned, "you are stuck with me now, Empress. I didn't survive an elder vampire just to walk away when things get complicated." Seraphine laughed and pulled him close, kissing him with an intensity that made Marcus forget about politics and treaties and the watching guards. This was what mattered to people from different worlds. Finding something worth protecting, worth building, worth loving, despite all the reasons it should not work. News of their relationship spread quickly, as news always did in the connected galaxy. Some celebrated it as proof that cooperation between species could transcend even the deepest divides. Others condemned it as unnatural, as betrayal, as dangerous precedent, but most people simply accepted it as two individuals making their own choices about their own lives. The Human Colonial Federation sent official congratulations and a joke gift, a book on human vampire romance fiction that had Marcus laughing for hours. Seraphine read it with bemused fascination, pointing out all the ways that fictional vampires were nothing like real bloodborne culture. They established formal protocols for mixed species relationships, creating legal frameworks that allowed humans and vampires to form bonds that both cultures recognized. It was messy and complicated and required compromises from both sides, but it worked because people on both sides wanted it to work. A Year after Marcus threw himself between Seraphine and death, they stood together. Before a gathering of humans and vampires at the completed embassy, Marcus wore formal human military dress, while Seraphine wore the traditional robes of vampire royalty. They addressed the crowd not as separate species but as partners building. Something new. Marcus spoke about humanity's journey from primitive origins to galactic civilization, emphasizing that humans succeeded not through individual power, but through cooperation, through recognizing that working together made everyone stronger, that differences were sources of strength rather than division. Finn spoke about vampire history, the long centuries of isolation and conquest, and how that path had led to stagnation. She acknowledged that accepting help from others, admitting vulnerability and working as equals rather than rulers was difficult for her people, but necessary for their continued survival. Together, they announced the formation of the Alliance Council, a governing body that would oversee human-vampire cooperation and eventually expand to include other species who wished to join a new model of galactic civilization. Based on mutual respect rather than domination, the crowd cheered and Marcus caught Seraphine's hand, squeezing gently. They had done it against all odds, against opposition from their own people, against the weight of millennia of history. They had proven that change was possible, that connection could transcend species, that love could bridge even the deepest divides. That night they stood together on the palace balcony, overlooking the capital city of Noctis as prime lights glittered below, representing millions of vampires who were slowly learning to see humans as partners rather than prey or servants in somewhere. Out in the galaxy, human colonies were learning that vampires could be allies rather than monsters. "You changed everything," Seraphine whispered, resting her head against Marcus's shoulder, one stubborn human mercenary who refused to see me as a monster, who threw himself into danger to protect me, who fought an elder vampire because he believed I mattered. Marcus held her close, breathing in the strange cold scent that was uniquely hers. "You changed everything too," he replied. "One lonely Empress who trusted a human enough to let him see her vulnerable, who built an empire on cooperation instead of fear, who loved someone despite all the reasons it should not work." They had both been alone, carrying burdens that no one else could understand, until the day of vampire. Empress whispered, "Stay in my bed tonight," to a human mercenary who said yes. Now they faced the future together, building something that would outlast even Seraphine's immortality, a legacy of cooperation and understanding that would reshape the galaxy. Sanguine Dominion entered a new era, not of conquest but of growth, and humanity found allies among the most unlikely species in existence, all because two people refused to let differences divide them, chose connection over isolation, chose love over fear. Marcus Kane, the human mercenary who survived impossible odds, and Empress Seraphine, the vampire who learned to trust, again stood together, watching stars drift past, knowing that they had written a new chapter in galactic history, showing everyone that the future belonged to those brave enough to build it together.